Why have a sports car and not drive it, says somebody close to Kadarius Toney. That and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, why are the New York Giants not driving their sports car?
All right. So let's try and contextualize this a little bit. I'll put it to you like this. Have you ever seen the movie Harlem Nights before?
No, I've not.
All right. So one of the best movies in Black cinema. Go ahead and check it out. From Eddie Murphy, Red Fox. Just on Richard Pryor, the impeccable Della Reese. On down the line. There's a scene in Harlem Nights where Della Reese is arguing with Eddie Murphy to the point where they get into a fight out in the back alley. One of the most hilarious movie sequences I've ever seen before. Absolute classic. And during the fight, Eddie Murphy pulls out a pistol and she sticks out her toe, sticks out her foot and says, shoot off my pinky toe. And so Eddie Murphy sitting there looking at her like she's crazy. He goes ahead and shoots off her pinky toe. Like, what else did you expect to happen? Like, she's sitting there waving her foot out. He's got a gun pointed at her toe. He shoots off her pinky toe. So I say all this to say that, honestly, what did we expect to happen with Kadarius Toney after this entire offseason, right?
That's a loaded question.
I mean, honestly, after everything that happened, the moment he got drafted, we were like, oh my gosh, a guy with even gadget or manufactured touch in the descriptor of his profile to a team with a, let's say, quote unquote, football guy as a head coach. And a non-creative
that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, a non-creative offensive coordinator in Jason Garrett.
Right.
They bring in Kenny Golladay over the offseason. So at the very least, and Saquon Barkley coming back from injury. So at the very least, he would have been third, fourth, fifth almost the best case scenario in terms of the pecking order. So it's just what did we expect to happen? So now to be fair, I don't think we really expected 2 receptions and -2 yards for him to start off his career in 2 games. But still, I do feel like it's fair to poke fun at the situation. It's fair to poke fun at the shoe thing, him missing time in camp, blah, blah, blah. But if we look at everything that happened throughout the offseason, and then we look at what's happened over the first 2 weeks, honestly, I have to ask again, what did we expect to happen? Because I'm not too terribly surprised.
What we expected and what Kadarius Toney expected are 2 totally different things. So I completely understand Kadarius Toney's side of this, and he's getting very frustrated on social media, and he got in a little argument with Joe Judge, and everything's been downhill. And a few episodes ago, I tried to contextualize his offseason and say maybe it was just a lot of misunderstandings, and it appears that it's not. However, I'd be mad if I was him too. And now we just have to figure out, what do we do in Dynasty? Because he's never going to be cheap. A first-round pick in general ever is just never going to be cheaper than Kadarius Toney is right now. Now, you and I have tried to put that in perspective and say, should we just pretend he's not a first-round pick because he shouldn't have been? There was only 2 teams in the league that were willing to draft him in the first. The rest of them were probably looking at late second, early third, and then they would have had a plan for them. If he went to the Chiefs, they would have had a plan for Kadarius Toney. So some people think, well, maybe he's just slow to come along. I know we tweeted about it earlier and somebody had mentioned, well, guys take time. Yes, but we expect more production than this from first round wide receivers. Yeah. We expect there to be eased in. So DK Metcalf was an excellent example. DK Metcalf wasn't ready to be an alpha when he came into the league. And Pete Carroll said that's fine. Pete Carroll eased him in, lots of slants, lots of goes. And now DK has an excellent route tree because he got eased in as a first round wide receiver should. So sure, he wasn't ready to light the league on fire, but he was ready to be involved, or else he wouldn't have been a first-round pick. We have to remember, Kadarius Toney's making a lot of money. You make a lot of money when you're a first-round pick in the NFL. So he's making a lot of money to stand on the sideline, and you put the most frustrating aspect of it into perspective just a moment ago by saying, there is no room for Kadarius Toney in this offense. For one, they're not creative anyway, so they're not going to manufacture touches. We saw Rondale Moore thrive this weekend with an ADOT of 3.3. Right. That's a team that had a plan when they took a player. Kadarius Toney is not going to be able to get in on the slot, so he can't be a legitimate slot receiver because Sterling Shepard is literally the longest tenured giant on the roster, or at least on the offense. And he's probably their best wide receiver right now, definitely right now. Hopefully Kenny Golladay comes along, but then they added Kenny Golladay. So you're already paying a bunch of money to Kenny Golladay. Kenny Galladay's on the sideline frustrated. So if Kenny Galladay's yelling at Daniel Jones, do you think they care what Kadarius Toney has to say? They're going to get Kenny Golladay right. So the problem is we're going to have to make a decision right now if you even care. Do you even care what happens with Kadarius Toney in terms of dynasty? Do you want to try to capitalize, or do you just want to sit this one out? I think I want nothing to do with it, and that doesn't seem like the sharp play. The sharp play probably means you just, like guys we're going to talk about in a second, Trey Sermon, Brandon Aiyuk. The sharp play is probably to capitalize on all the negativity, just because there's no way that this much negativity can be real, but it seems like it may be real. It seems like the Giants have absolutely no idea what he's doing there. It honestly, to this point, if something came out that the Giants submitted the wrong name by accident, I would not be surprised in the slightest.
No, I wouldn't be surprised either. But I think you put it in good perspective that regardless of what the Giants thought of Toney, he gets the first round draft capital. Even if you look at historical hit rates, like for first round draft picks, I mean, you really do have to kind of squint and see how Toney kind of pulls himself up out of this. Because I looked back over the last 5 seasons of just first round draft picks alone, and literally the only 2 wide receivers that I saw that only had this few targets in their first 2 games of being active. Wild guess who the guys are that only had 2 targets and this few yards in their first couple of starts.
Ooh, Laquan Treadwell in there.
Yes, he is one of them.
And the other one is Josh Doxson.
Actually, no. Josh Doxson actually had he had the Devils line. He had 6 for 66 in his first 2 games. It was actually Mike Williams. Mike Williams had 2 targets for 15 yards in his first couple of starts. Other notable guys that only had 2 targets in the first 2 starts, DJ Moore, but he also had 51 yards and a touchdown in those first couple of targets in the first couple of games. But regardless, it is one of those everybody else. Literally everybody else that has first round draft capital has come out with multiple targets. I mean, the yardage has been there for some of them. Touchdowns have been there for some of them. So it's not just that. I know that some folks look at the 2020 class that we were essentially spoiled with last season with Judy, with Ruggs, with Ceedee, with Rager, with some of the so many guys that we were excited about from a prospect perspective. And they all came out pretty much locked and loaded from week 1. Even Jalen Rager looked good in his first couple of starts, before he got hurt. Yeah. So it's very difficult for me to see from a statistical standpoint, Toney pulling himself out of that rut. So it's just easier for me to say that while, he has the draft capital, we'll see what works out from a contract perspective for pretty much any of the other pass catchers currently associated with the Giants, and he might move up in the ranks over the next year or two. But for me, it's just easier for me to take a step back and just I don't want anything to do with this. I mean, buy the dip all you want, but at some point sometimes it's easier to just let the situation play out. And if you miss out on him, you kind of miss out on him, because what about his prospect screams he has the talent to be a, let's say, alpha wide receiver 1. And I'm not seeing that as of right now. Could he be a complimentary wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, flex-ish type of player? Absolutely. But I don't see him being the type of guy that you need to go out and acquire as of right now.
So speaking of something I want nothing to do with, it's trying to keep up with every single tidbit of NFL news. So that's why if you go over to footballguys.com and subscribe to the email list, you get straight to your inbox every single little tidbit of the NFL news that you're going to need for the week. And of course, we pluck the news that we bring to you for Dynasty is plucked directly from that email list. So if you haven't subscribed already to that email list from Joe Bryant, Sigmund Bloom, Cecil Lammy, go ahead and subscribe to that now and get all the news straight to your inbox. So this next one, we're actually going to have 2, and I think there's buying opportunities for both of these players in this offense, and it's really important to try to capitalize when you can get players from a prolific offense for super, super cheap. But we have San Francisco 49ers running back Trey Sermon. He exited in week 2, second half against the Eagles. He was evaluated for a concussion. We know now, I believe it was a concussion. So he also fumbled on his very first carry. So the saga continues for Trey Sermon. It started last week. We had the Elijah Mitchell title, and Elijah Mitchell apparently just straight up outproduced Trey Sermon. Forget about the fact that they traded up for Trey Sermon. Forget about the fact that Matt Waldman thought Trey Sermon, or still thinks Trey Sermon is the best running back in this class. Forget about all that, and it's Elijah Mitchell time, right? Well, so many injuries in this backfield. It didn't matter it didn't matter what the 49ers thought. It didn't matter what kind of treatment they were trying to give Sermon to get his head right. Injuries brought him in week 2. What's he do? Fumbles the first carry and then gets hurt before he can redeem himself. It could never get more negative than this on a guy that, like we said, in 1 QB, he was in your first round. 2 QB, he was at the beginning of your second round. Now, people are probably going to try to get whatever return they can for him. If you're a contending team, you could probably send your second pretty easily, assuming that your second's going to be late. Even a third plus a player at this point. It's a time that you can actually capitalize. Sometimes there's just so much negative news that it brings me in on a player that I wasn't in on in the first place, because at this point, with so many injuries, even Jermichael Hasty was getting a lot of the work. Now he's hurt. Right. Trenton Cannon is going to get run this week. Now, if Trenton Cannon gets run over Trey Sermon, I'm out. I'm done. But if that happens, I mean, it's too late to sell Trey Sermon for anything anyway. So people are probably going to be looking to get out of Trey Sermon like this week. Like right now, you can acquire Trey Sermon for super cheap. You are gambling, like I said, because of this weekend. Trenton Cannon is getting a lot of the run. Then we've got a huge problem. But we've had 4 running back injuries, and Jeff Wilson isn't coming back until week 8. So
probably,
basically, we're banking on the fact that Trey Sermon should be a good running back, despite maybe his head not being in it correctly to Kyle Shanahan's liking thus far. If he can just get some carries, and I mean, Kareem Hunt fumbled on his first carry and then had a monster game. You don't know what Trey Sermon would have done the rest of the game, which presents a viable buying opportunity. I mean, maybe he would have stunk the rest of the game, but you don't know. You know you're going to get him for a much bigger discount than when you drafted him right now. That's for sure.
Right. And I mean, to highlight what you said and to make it an even bigger point, yes. First carry for Trey Sermon, he gets absolutely crunched. I want to say like 3 dudes, or at least 2 people, like hit him in the head, neck area. So that pretty much puts his first NFL start, or like first NFL game, that's completely out the window. Probably his next game, in order to get back into like actually getting up to game speed and all that, probably taking some time to get back to that. But I think you do bring up a good point about the fact that whatever we thought about him, whatever the team thought of him when they traded up to get him in the draft, to whatever happened between there and last Sunday, well, not last Sunday, 2 Sundays ago now, to the point where he was completely inactive for that game. Something had to have happened for the entire franchise to be this excited about picking him up to not even starting him, or at least having him active on game day for week 1.
Right.
We'll never know what that's going to be. I think it's fair to question Kyle Shanahan as a talent evaluator at this point. But regardless, I do think that from a talent perspective, like coming into it, if you take away, like you've taken all the noise and just look at his talent profile from an objective stance, he does profile as a good running back, right? I mean, productive in college, right. Still has the speed, still has the burst. I mean, like not like otherworldly burst, but enough to be a productive back in this league, right? So compared to the other talent that's currently on that currently on that team, just within that team, he should be better than. I mean, he should be better than Jermichael Hasty. Should be better. I mean, should at least be able to be a complement to Elijah Mitchell. So we do think at some point the talent should rise to the top, and he should be able to play a prominent role in that offense. Just looking at it objectively, not what we want, not what we think is going to happen, but just looking at that roster as a whole and the injuries that they currently have. If Sermon is healthy, he should be the one that's a part of that rotation, a heavy part of that rotation.
Yeah. And that statement that you just made, that he should be able to at least be a compliment to Elijah Mitchell. If you could go back and talk to Chris 2 weeks ago and tell him that statement, you'd be thinking, what are you talking? Obviously,
yeah, like Sermon already won.
He should be way better than Elijah Mitchell. So it's important that we understand So there is added context. So we don't want to pretend that nothing has happened. Obviously, a ton has happened with that 49ers backfield. But you also have to contextualize the fact that it's only been 2 weeks. And if it's been, such a rough 2 weeks, that doesn't mean that it can't be a great 15 weeks the rest of the year for Trey Sermon, especially since no matter what the 49ers think, he's getting the rock because they have no one except, like I said, Trenton Cannon. I mean, that's the thing. If I see Trenton Cannon get 8 carries this week and I'm done, don't talk to me about Trey Sermon ever again.
Well, he might not play this week, or Sermon might not even play this week.
He may not. You're right. So we will see. You're right. So there's a caveat. If he's not cleared in time, then he won't play. Then Trenton Cannon will get some run. And I actually like Trenton Cannon from Jets preseason 2 years ago.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So then that leads us into Brandon Aiyuk. And you made a point that you said Kyle Shanahan might just not be a good talent evaluator. There's two things. He's either a liar or he's a terrible talent evaluator. Don't feed us this nonsense that you don't notice the difference between Trent Sherfield on the field and Brandon Aiyuk. That was so why do those words come out of your mouth? Then why did you draft Brandon Aiyuk in the first last year if you don't notice the difference between Trent Sherfield and Brandon Aiyuk, especially when Brandon Aiyuk's production came on so much manufactured intentional targets last year, and he had to be the wide receiver one because Deebo Samuel was hurt, and he produced well as the wide receiver one, and now you don't notice the difference between he and Trent Sherfield. So you can get out of our faces with that. That's disrespectful to the football fan community, or he's just bad, but I think he's a liar. So Brandon Aiyuk's buying opportunity is almost exactly the same. You could probably copy and paste my points on Trey Sermon on Brandon Aiyuk. It cannot be as bad as the picture that's being painted right now. And I will say, Brandon Aiyuk played 100%, maybe not exactly 100, but when I looked after halftime, it was 100% of the snaps he was in on. So he only received, I think, 2 targets. He had 1 reception. But all of this fits coming back from a hamstring injury to me more than it fits that Brandon Aiyuk did something this offseason. So to me, it seems a lot more like he's just trying to get back into playing form, and everything else got blown entirely out of proportion. And especially with Deebo Samuel doing well so far, and apparently it was cramped, so Deebo Samuel shouldn't miss any time. With Deebo Samuel doing so well, a lot of people are going to think that negatively reflects on Brandon Aiyuk. We haven't seen them both produce together because both of them have had so many injuries. So I'm telling myself that Brandon Aiyuk is just trying to come back from his hamstring injury, and that we could still see a productive season and career from him.
I agree for the most part. And like, since just to kind of like put a bow on that whole Kyle Shanahan personnel thing, remember that whole like pounding the table for Joe Williams story that came out like 3 or 4 years ago? I don't even remember like whatever happened to Joe Williams.
Nothing. I mean, go on.
I don't even remember what happened to that dude. But regardless, I do think there's something to, because remember, like, how did Brandon Aiyuk start his year? Like his rookie season, right? He came into the league with a hamstring injury, and like that was part of why like he missed games like throughout his rookie campaign. So if he's showing up with a hamstring pull throughout the offseason, that kind of literally hamstrung like his ability to be able to participate in camp.
Pun intended.
And now that on top of everything else, so it's just like, all right, I get it. Now I don't know if it's if he's not keeping himself in game shape throughout the offseason, like training correctly, keeping himself in like any of that other stuff, I have no idea.
Yeah, we'll never know.
But I think it's important to understand, like, if Kyle Shanahan is noticing that there's something about what he's doing that's not keeping him fresh, like for the team, then that could be a part of why like he's not as involved in the offense and essentially in like the quote unquote doghouse. That's what we've heard day in and day out for the last couple of weeks. So while I am concerned, there's nothing to say that, I mean, I've been looking at, since we were talking about like Toney in the last segment, looking at Brandon Aiyuk right out of the gate, already earning targets like in that offense and producing within his first couple of games and throughout the rest of the season. So we know that Kyle Shanahan has seen what he's capable of doing, like once he gets out on the field. So it just could be elements off the field that's keeping him literally off the field at this point, and he wants him to be that elite wide receiver that he know will be good for his offense. So it just could be just that extra stuff that happens outside of the 60 minutes of play that we get from them once a week that we really just will never know until we see him out on the field for, his 60, 70, 80% of the snaps.
Yeah, and the whole point of that segment is because Dynasty is about reading through the tea leaves. So, I mean, if you're just reactionary in Dynasty, you're never going to acquire players cheaply. You're never going to be able to capitalize on dips. We just have to look. Is it likely that both Brandon Aiyuk and Trey Sermon beat their preseason value by the end of the year? Maybe not. One of them probably does, but I could definitely see there's definitely a scenario where week 8 you're happy to have both of them, and you could have acquired both of them very easily right now. Nobody's going to fight you trying to acquire. If you offer even fair value for them, you're going to be able to get them on your roster at this point.
Sure.
So I hope everybody has checked out the footballguys.com website now. It's brand new. Looks great. Love it. Podcast is right there. You can find all the shows, but lesser known, the League Dominator app. If you go to your Apple or Android store, you can find the League Dominator app by Football Guys. Sports Guys LLC is the title under which you will find it. So you can go over there. You can plug your league in. You're going to get all kinds of tips, advice about your league. So definitely go over and download your League Dominator app because it's all about saving time, worry less, and winning more with Football Guys. And those tools are how you do it. I mean, you go to the website, you get the email list, you go to the App Store, you get the League Dominator. Right there, we cut in half the amount of work you're doing. Actually, more than half. Do almost all the work. You just have to click the button to set the lineup, to be quite honest with you. So just go over and download the League Dominator app on your Apple or Android store. The last one's a doozy. I'm glad you brought this up. We have Tony Pollard outproducing Ezekiel Elliot so far this year, but the snap share is really close. So this is like tearing the fantasy community apart. Really, a lot of us already felt like Tony Pollard was better than Zeke, and the contract is miserable. I mean, I cannot believe that Jerry Jones got had in the way that he did for Ezekiel Elliott. It had to have been for marketing reasons. I have to believe that. But the team not only what I thought about this today, Chris. What if the team just had Tony Pollard and James Conner? Would they be in any different of a position?
I don't know about James Conner, but I get where you're going with it. Like that archetype of back that could be used in those.
$2.6 million instead of 90.
No, I see where you're going with it. Yeah. Like Melvin Gordon.
Sure. Or Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon would be a little more expensive. But I mean, Kenyon Drake. The point is you could insert so many players for Zeke, and maybe Zeke is technically more talented than James Conner and Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake. I understand that, but the point is it doesn't matter. You're getting better production when Tony Pollard's on the field. So I agree that there's not really RB1s in backfields anymore. It's always 1As and 1Bs, but Tony Pollard could be a 1A and somebody else could be the 1B for so much less money. So now what do we do in Dynasty with Zeke?
I think it'd be very difficult for you to even sell him for what you think he's worth at this point. You're not selling him for equal value or for what he should be valued at the market because of the production that's going on. So other than the touchdown saving him from yesterday.
Oh, thank goodness he got that touch.
And that's it. Otherwise, like, even still, you're not going to be able to get fair market value for him at this point. And he's not at a point in his career where it's just, what are you going to get back in return that's actually going to help your roster, right? Because at any point during this season, we could still see him having, crossing the century mark for yardage, at least one touchdown, goes for 5 for 30, 5 for 40 in the passing game. Like that is still within the range of outcomes for Zeke at this point in his career. So he could still be classified as an RB1 and like produce like an RB1 on any particular week. It's just that we just don't know when those games are coming.
But the scary part is what the Cowboys think they're doing. They think they invested $90 million in him, so they want him to last the one more game this year. I roll my eyes because I've heard that so many more times. I get it. There's one more game. So are we the NBA now? Are we going to give players games off? Why is that there's one more game. If you get hurt, you got hurt in 16 games. you're going to get hurt in 17 games.
Right.
So that narrative is ridiculous. But the Cowboys seem to think that, well, there's 17 games now. We paid Zeke so much money that we just don't want to give him as many touches. Well, the problem with that is that Tony Pollard is producing better than Ezekiel Elliott on the touches he's getting. So when we have Ezekiel Elliott on our roster and the Cowboys have no incentive to get Ezekiel Elliott in the game, they are so worried about their $90 million that they don't even want to play him. I mean, it seems like they want him on the shelf in emergency break glass type situation for him. When it's tough in the fourth quarter, okay, now Zeke's in. When you're in a battle against like the Chiefs or something, okay, now Zeke's in the game. He doesn't add anything there, I will add, but the Cowboys think that he's the pride and joy of the Cowboys. They think he needs to be in those leverage situations, but Tony Pollard's still getting high value touches all the time. So through 2 weeks, we're in a situation where what Tony Pollard's like, we're RB9 on the year so far, and Zeke's like RB25. And I know it's been 2 weeks, but the problem is that the Cowboys have no incentive to get Ezekiel Elliott more involved. In fact, they have incentive to get less involved. Tony Pollard has given them incentive to keep Zeke on the shelf. And it seems like everybody's perception around there is we want Zeke on the shelf because he's amazing. Not what we know to be true is Zeke is on the shelf because he's not adding value to his touches in the same way that Tony Pollard is. But
that's exactly right. Yeah.
But they have that out. They have that, this is where you get into the Sigmund Bloom, like going down narrative street. The Cowboys have that out where it really doesn't matter what the truth lies because the end result is Tony Pollard on the football field. But that's not good for us in Dynasty when we roster Ezekiel Elliott because now they don't have any reason to be utilizing our player that takes up so much of the quote-unquote capital of our roster. And now you're stuck with them. And it's similar to Derrick Henry. You will never, ever be able to trade Ezekiel Elliott from here going forward for what you believe he's worth to your team. And you're just, I wish I had better advice. You're just going to be stuck with him. You're not going to get value for him. I guess my best advice is probably just take a loss on him and see what you can do with it.
Man, that's going to be rough. It just depends on what type of return you could possibly get for him. But yeah, at this point, are you trying to, you maybe can flip him for maybe like not next year's first, but maybe like a couple years down the road, like that sort of thing. If you want to try and play the long game on recouping some of that value, but because you're at such a, I don't know, just at it's such a like crossroads with his career and like with his value at this point. I think pretty much everybody thought going into this year, this would pretty much be his final year of holding on to a majority of the rushing share, a decent amount of targets, and then maybe at the end of the year or towards the end of the year, we can make that decision. But Tony Pollard has really kind of mucked up that process by immediately pushing the Cowboys and the rest of the fantasy community by saying that, hey, like I can actually produce faster or more efficiently than Zeke can. Tony Pollard, we just saw him rip off a 28-yard run yesterday. Like Zeke hasn't ripped off a 28-yard run in how many weeks or years?
Who knows?
So it's just, Zeke had a 18, 19-yard gain in the same game, but he doesn't look the same. Like objectively, like you can just watch the game and you can just tell like one dude's running faster than the other. That's pretty simple. One can reach the edge and make that turn, and one can't. So if Zeke can't provide that sort of value to the Cowboys offense anymore, and also he's not going to be involved in the passing game as much, it's just at this point, while taking a loss, like that might be your only route. Other than that, you might be stuck holding him on your roster.
And let me add, this is why I talk so much about contracts, especially with running backs. This is why running backs don't get second contracts. I'm sorry. You can be mad all you want, but it's never going to be a good idea to give your running back whatever 6-year, $90 million contract or whatever it was. Yeah. So a couple ideas I had. So I don't put Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins in the same bucket because I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I just think it's extremely unlikely for Cam Akers to rise back to the value that he had pre-injury because of the Achilles. However, where I'm going with this is J.K. Dobbins. That's different. I think it's a foot fracture. Probably going to come back. Do you send Ezekiel Elliott for J.K. Dobbins?
Ooh, that's actually not that bad.
We'll see. It sounds bad because Zeke is on the football field, But I think that's the type of thing that you're going to have to do if you want to recoup anything for Ezekiel Elliott.
So let's say like if you're sitting there in a super flex league and let's say like your QB2 is somebody like Tua, who's, you're already looking like, and things like, again, this is just in week 2, like going headed into week 3, things are already looking bad for your season. If you want to make that snap cut right now and just say like, all right, fine. Like, I'm just going to just kick out some of the dead weight, come back in 2022. Sure, I could see something like that where it's just you take the loss, but you take the highest upside from that loss and picking up a back that should be back next season. The foot fracture, he should be able to come back at least at decent strength since it happened like essentially before the season even started. So yeah, I actually do like that path forward. I think that's a possible way to go about it.
And you mentioned a good point. I mean, you don't have to be rebuilding to get that done. You could just be not having a good this season. If your season's already looking bad, if you lost Jerry Jeudy, and like you mentioned, you lose Tua, you lost some pieces that are going to be good for the foreseeable future, but you lost them for this season.
Right.
Oh, you just bought back 4 years by trading for J.K. Dobbins, and you look silly. Who cares if you look silly in Dynasty in season week 2? You're worried about what you're going to look in 2022. So that's something I wouldn't mind doing if you could float that out there. I don't know if anyone snap accepts that or not. I guess if you need the production from Ezekiel Elliott and you have J.K. Dobbins, then it's a match made in heaven. But that's going to do it for today. I know you're going to be on the Mailbag show later this week. They're doing a great job over there. So everybody, please go check out Chris on the Mailbag show this week. If you have any questions, please submit that on Twitter. I'm sure you can ask Chris or you can ask any of the hosts over there. Troy's going to be there. Victoria's going to be there. So please also go over to YouTube, subscribe, rate, review, hit that notification bell so you don't miss a show. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for coming out.
Peace.